Hello everyone, it's been a little while, but I am back, and today we're going to be talking about the 10 things I wish I knew before I started painting in watercolour. So I've been painting in watercolour a little while now, and there's been quite a few things I've learned along the way that I just really wish someone would have told me when I first started. And if any of you are new to watercolour painting, then this might be helpful. The first tip is to loosen up. When I first started painting, and when you start any new art medium, it's very easy to tighten up, to work slowly and try and get everything perfect on the first try. And with watercolour especially, that is not the way to go. With watercolour, you just want to be as loose as possible, or at least for my style of watercolour painting, I like to be loose and paint fast. And I've just personally found that that has given me the best results. A few things that have helped me are standing up, and just painting standing up has just naturally loosens up your body, which naturally loosens up your painting. And another thing has been holding the brush a little further back. So I used to paint like this, like kind of how you'd hold a pencil, but recently I've been holding it a little bit further back, and that has just been helping me loosen up my painting. The next tip kind of links back into the first tip, and that is to use big brushes. When I first started, I had some pretty tiny brushes because I figured the smaller the brush, the more detail I can get. But really with watercolour, if the brush can hold as much water and paint as possible, then that just really helps you to carry on your painting instead of being constantly interrupted by having to refill the brush. And also big brushes really help, especially in the beginning stages of a painting when you are putting down a lot of water, and it just really helps to get the nice gradations. The next tip is wait for it to dry. I definitely didn't realise when I first started watercolour painting that you kind of have to do it in stages and build up the layers. I would just try and do the whole thing at once without really managing the wet dampness of the paper. The problem with not waiting for the paper to dry between stages is it's really hard to manage what's going on. So in order to avoid this, or at least try and control it a little bit more, it's best to just do your first wash, let it dry completely, and then come back for the second and third layers. So whatever you can do to make it a little bit more predictable is good. And this brings me to the fourth thing that I wish I'd have known, and that is the tea, milk and honey method. And this was first coined by Joseph Zbukvich in his book Mastering Atmosphere and Mood in Watercolour. I think the book is now out of print, but luckily there are some PDFs that you can find still online. And I've made a whole video on this, so if you want to watch that, then click up here somewhere. But basically, this method is about having 3 stages of the painting. The first stage, which is the tea method, which is the wettest stage of the painting, where you have mainly water and less paint. Then you go on to the milk stage, which is a little bit more water, so this is the second wash after it's dried. You're adding a little bit more paint into the mix, so it's a little bit more of a milky consistency. And then you get into the final stage, which is the honey, which is where you almost have completely just paint and a very little amount of water, and that's when you have your darkest values, and you usually use a smaller brush for that stage. And it's just a really nice way of thinking about the consistency of the paint, and it just really helped me and was a real game changer. Number 5 is don't be afraid to go dark. One of the most common mistakes that I see beginner watercolour painters make, and something that I definitely did a lot at the beginning, was not realising that the paint will dry quite a bit lighter than it looks when you first put it down. So a lot of the time you'll see with beginners, their paintings just appear very pale, and that is generally because when things dry they get a bit lighter, and unless you account for that as you're painting, then the whole painting can sometimes come across quite light and washed out. Next point is composition is everything. So when I first started out, I was so focused on trying to just get everything right and so focused on the technique of the watercolour itself that I would forget to take a step back and realise that the composition of the painting is actually the most important part. For me, I've realised a few things, and that is having lines in the composition, especially with landscape painting, having lines leading the viewer to the most important part. It's also using areas of high contrast, whether that's value contrast or edges that are sharp in a particular area, to guide the viewer to the most important part of the painting. I also try to avoid repeating things too much or having something slap bang in the middle of the composition. So obviously the rule of thirds, everyone's heard of that one. My next thing that I wish I'd have known is to start off with a small number of paints, because you really don't need that many. When I first started out, I bought, I think it was a set of 18 paints, and they were really cheap paints, and it just meant that I didn't really understand what each one did and how they worked with each other. So if I was starting it again, I probably would just buy a burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, quinacridone rose, Hansa yellow medium, and that's basically it. And that's all I think you need. So you need a red, a blue, a yellow, and an earth tone. And I think those 4 things are all you really need to start out. The next point is, I wish I'd gone outside sooner with my watercolour paints. Painting outside has been one of the best ways I've found to improve my painting, and I've also found a really great group of sketchers in the urban sketching community. It's helped me improve my drawing and my observation skills, but it's also helped me with my watercolour painting because it's taught me to paint faster and basically just get the painting done as quickly and efficiently as possible. When you're sketching outside, you don't have all the time in the world, and there's lots of elements and things going on around you, so it just forces you to focus on the painting and just get it done. And I've usually found that the less time I've had on a particular painting outside usually turns out to be a better painting. I've made a video on how I sketch outside, so if you'd like to see that, then click somewhere up above. Number 9 is invest in paper. If I had to choose between spending money on paints, brushes or paper, I would definitely say paper is the most important one, and you can get away with slightly cheaper paints and slightly cheaper brushes as long as your paper is really good. But if you're painting on cheap paper, you're going to find it really hard to get a good result. I try to stick to 100% cotton paper where I can, especially in my sketchbooks, so I like to use the Etcher sketchbooks, which have 100% cotton, and also I found the Stillman and Burn sketchbooks are pretty good too, even though they're not 100% cotton, but the paper is pretty good, especially the beta paper. Paper is a very personal thing, so you'll want to just experiment and find what works for you. The Arches paper is amazing. It is a little bit expensive, but it's worth it if you want to start taking watercolour painting a little bit more seriously. And finally, I wish I'd known that I would make a lot of bad paintings and that is okay. When you start painting in a new medium, you have all these aspirations and goals, and you think it's going to turn out a certain way, and most of the time it doesn't. I've recently started oil painting, so I've been going through this process all over again and feeling a bit uncertain and feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. So if I was starting out watercolour again, I would just tell myself to embrace those bad paintings and realise that they're pretty much the only way you're going to improve. So it's actually a good thing if you do bad paintings, because you're learning from your mistakes. There's a quote that I really like by American illustrator Walt Stanchfield, and he says we all have 10,000 bad drawings in us, and the sooner we get them out, the better. So I try and remember that whenever I'm doing anything, I'm just getting those bad paintings and drawings out, and eventually the good ones will come through. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if there's anything that you would add to this list, and I will see you in the next video.